The clatter of silver on porcelain was the only sound for a moment. Then came the gasp. A collective, perfectly rehearsed intake of air from 30 of the most influential vultures in the city. Lord Marcus Ashbourne stood over his sister, an expression of theatrical horror on his face as the dark red wine bled across the white silk of her gown. A perfect stain, a ruby wound against snow. It was a masterpiece of social assassination, designed to shatter her composure and prove the family's whispers true. That Lady Corinne Ashbourne was a fragile, hysterical creature unfit for society. They were all waiting for the tears. I was waiting for them myself. I had been told, in velvet-gloved warnings from her stepmother, to expect such outbursts. But Corinne did not cry. She did not flinch. Her gaze lifted from the ruined dress to her brother's face, and her eyes. They were not the eyes of prey. They were cold, clear, and utterly devoid of the panic this room craved. I watched her hands resting in her lap. Not a single tremor. Her pulse, visible at the delicate line of her throat, remained as steady as a marble statue's. This was not the collapse her family had engineered. It was a performance of a different kind, a chilling, deliberate acceptance. The room held its breath, hungry for the drama. And as I watched her, a disquieting thought coiled in my mind. She knew this was coming. She had dressed in white for a reason. Join our circle if you too see the truth behind the masks. The real question isn't why he did it. The question is, why did she let him? The illusion was flawless. Marcus did not step away from her side. He hovered, too close, too attentive, his movements rehearsed down to the smallest detail. The napkin in his hand never quite touched the stain, yet he dabbed at it with persistent care, ensuring every eye in the room remained fixed on his performance. "My dear sister," he murmured, loud enough for those nearest to lean in, "you mustn't distress yourself." Corinne inclined her head. Not in gratitude, not in embarrassment, in acceptance. It was subtle, so subtle that no one else seemed to notice. But I did. That small movement did not belong to a woman being humiliated. It belonged to someone allowing a scene to continue. The Marchioness arrived moments later, her presence smooth as silk, sliding over a blade. "You must forgive her," Eleanor said gently, addressing no one and everyone at once. "She has always been sensitive." The word lingered. Sensitive, fragile, unstable, each one carefully chosen, each one repeated often enough to become truth. Corinne said nothing, not even when her brother's hand briefly tightened on her wrist, just enough pressure to guide her, to position her, to keep her exactly where he needed her. A puppet to anyone watching. But her posture never broke. The room shifted, not physically, but perceptibly. Curiosity softened into quiet certainty. The narrative had settled. They believed it now. So did Marcus. That was his mistake. He found me later by the French doors, a cigar already lit, as though he required something to steady his hands. "A regrettable display," he said lightly, exhaling smoke into the cold night air. "My sister has always been unpredictable." Beyond the glass, the winter garden stood frozen in silver silence. Nothing moved. "Unpredictable?" I echoed. Marcus smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. Her emotions tend to overwhelm her. "Strange," I said, though the word felt less certain as I spoke it. I was told her condition could present differently in public. Marcus's expression softened, relief quickly disguised as patience. "It often does," he replied. "She can appear composed until she cannot." I said nothing, because for a moment, just a moment, I allowed myself to consider it. That perhaps I had misread her, that the stillness I had witnessed was not control, but suppression, that the collapse, when it came, would justify everything they had said. That was when it happened. Not the smile, that remained intact, but the pause, a fraction too long. Then, composure can be deceptive. Indeed. The library offered more privacy and fewer witnesses. Marcus poured brandy with practiced ease, though the decanter hovered a moment longer than necessary above the glass. A single drop slipped over the edge and struck the polished wood. He did not comment on it. Neither did I. "Your late mother," I began, letting the silence stretch just enough to unsettle, "was known for her business acumen." Marcus stiffened, barely. "She managed an impressive maritime portfolio." "Yes," he replied, "a complicated legacy." Complicated, not valuable, not significant, complicated. "Fortunate then," I said, "that it remains within the family." His fingers tightened around the glass. "For now." He lifted it to his lips too quickly. The mask was still there, but the cracks had begun to show. As my carriage pulled away from the estate, the evening replayed itself in fragments. The wine, the silence, the performance, and Corinne at the center of it all, not resisting, not reacting, allowing. The white dress had not been chosen in innocence. It had been chosen for contrast, for visibility, for impact. She had not been caught in the spectacle. She had shaped it. And if that was true, if even a part of it was true, then the question was no longer whether her family was deceiving society. The question was how long she had been waiting for them to reveal themselves, and why tonight had been the night she let it begin. Her gloves were immaculate. That was the first thing I noted. Marchioness Eleanor Ashbourne received me in the conservatory, a humid, cloying room filled with exotic orchids that seemed to watch our conversation. She had sent a note of apology for Corinne's indisposition. "The poor dear has taken to her bed," Eleanor said, her voice a carefully tuned instrument of sympathy. "The excitement of the dinner was simply too much for her delicate constitution. We have sent her to our country estate for absolute quiet." A lie. Not a graceful one, but a brutal, tactical removal of a key player from the board. She was not resting. She was exiled. Her constitution seemed quite robust to me, I countered, my eyes fixed on a purple-veined orchid that looked like a beautiful poison. She endured a public humiliation with a poise most military generals would envy. Eleanor's smile tightened at the edges. The script was failing. She had expected deference, not observation. "You are kind, Your Grace, but you see only the surface. Inside, her emotions are a tempest." Her hand went to the silver locket at her throat, a nervous, fluttering gesture that betrayed the calm in her voice. Her fingers squeezed it as if it were the source of her strength. It was the second misstep. I decided to press the fracture. I had hoped to ask her about her mother's private study. "I'm acquiring a collection of maritime maps, and was told the late Marchioness possessed some rare Portuguese charts." The reaction was immediate and startlingly defensive. "That room is sealed," Eleanor snapped, her voice losing its honeyed tone. A sliver of cold steel emerged. "It has been for years. A memorial. Corinne never goes near it. The memories are too painful." Her knuckles were white where they gripped the locket. The denial was too swift, too absolute. Why would a simple inquiry about maps provoke such a violent defense of a dusty room? She was not protecting Corinne's feelings. She was guarding something inside that study, something vital to their entire deception. As I took my leave, walking down the long hall of portraits, her voice drifted from the drawing room, the door left slightly ajar. She was speaking to someone in a hushed, urgent tone. "The Duke is asking questions. It is becoming complicated. We must accelerate matters with Mr. Finch." She stopped abruptly. I had paused, my shadow falling across the doorway. She saw me. The look on her face was not one of embarrassment, but of pure, undiluted panic. Her eyes, wide and terrified, met mine for a frozen second before she slammed the door. Mr. Finch. The name meant nothing to me, but to her, it was clearly the key to everything. And now, it was the key to my investigation. The stain spread. It began at a charity auction, a place where fortunes are displayed and reputations are dismantled with a smile. Lady Danbury, a woman whose tongue was sharper than a surgeon's scalpel, cornered Marcus Ashbourne near a collection of Qing dynasty vases. Her voice, though low, carried across the marble floor like a breaking wave. "Such a shame about dear Corinne's health," she purred, her eyes glittering. "One hears the country air is a permanent prescription for certain familial inconveniences." A dozen heads turned. The whispers began, no longer veiled in sympathy, but edged with a delicious predatory cruelty. The Ashbourne name was beginning to bleed, and the sharks were circling. Marcus's face was a mask of polite indifference, but I saw the muscle jumping in his jaw. I found Corinne's name on the guest list for a musicale later that week, a bold, almost suicidal move. She arrived alone, dressed in a gown the color of a thundercloud, a stark contrast to the pale pastels favored by the other women. She was no longer hiding, she was challenging them. I drew her into an alcove behind a tapestry depicting a brutal boar hunt. "What are you doing here?" I demanded, my voice a harsh whisper. "They are sharpening their knives for you." She met my gaze, and for the first time, the vulnerability I'd been conditioned to see was gone. In its place was a weary resolve. "Let them," she said, but the words faltered. Her breath caught, just once. Her gaze dropped for the briefest moment, as though something in her had slipped, before she forced it back into place. Then she steadied. Only slightly, barely enough to hear. Her fingers tightened around the edge of her clutch, the fabric creasing beneath the pressure. For a fraction of a second, her composure wavered, not visibly, not fully, but enough. Enough to betray the strain beneath it. Then she steadied. "It is better to face the executioner than to die of poison in the dark." She opened her small clutch and from it produced a folded piece of paper. It was a letter, the seal broken. "My lady mother's seal," she said, her finger tracing the fractured wax. "I found it in her study. Eleanor claimed the room was locked. It was not. The handwriting was elegant, feminine, but the words were a declaration of war. It was a letter from Corinne's mother to her solicitor, Mr. Finch, dated a week before her death. It spoke of Marcus's increasingly desperate requests for capital and Eleanor's frightening ambition. It instructed Finch to place the shipping portfolio into an unassailable trust upon her death, a trust Corinne alone could access on her 25th birthday. The letter was irrevocable proof. Her family hadn't been protecting her inheritance. They had been frantically trying to plunder it before the deadline. "This is not just about money, is it?" I asked, the cold reality settling in my bones. This was about erasure. They were not merely trying to steal her fortune. They were trying to steal her sanity, her very identity, to invalidate her claim before it could ever be made. They wanted to turn her into a non-person. She looked away, towards the brilliantly lit ballroom, where her brother was charming a circle of investors. "My mother did not die of a fever, Your Grace," she whispered, her voice trembling with a truth she had held alone for too long. "She fell from the balcony of her study, the same balcony Eleanor swore was always locked." The music from the ballroom seemed to die away. The air grew thin, cold. This was not a story of greed. It was something far more primal, far more monstrous. Her mother's death was no accident. The social guillotine was not just for Corinne's reputation. It was meant to sever her from a truth that could destroy them all. Stay close. We are now entering a darkness from which there may be no return. They needed a stage for their final triumph. I would provide it. My first move was to suggest to Lord Ashbourne that he host a dinner in my honor. The pretense was to formally announce my intentions toward Corinne, a lie he swallowed whole, his greed blinding him to the hook buried in the bait. An alliance with Valcrest would cement their social standing forever. He saw it as his coronation. I saw it as the ideal setting for his execution. The invitations went out on my ducal stationery, a subtle transfer of authority. The guests were coming for me, not for him. This was my arena now. The vibration in the room began subtly. I arrived early and spoke with the Earl of Covington, a man whose primary function in society is to act as a human echo chamber. I mentioned, in the most sympathetic tone, my concern for the Ashbourne estate's finances. "One hears Marcus is taking quite the risk on some new South American venture," I murmured, just loud enough for those nearby to catch the scent of blood. "I do hope Corinne's inheritance is properly insulated." The word insulated did its work. It was a poisoned dart. It implied a threat, a weakness. Within minutes, the whispers had mutated. By the time the soup was served, the entire room was alive with speculation. The dominoes were falling, one by one. I watched Marcus from across the table. He felt the shift. He held his wineglass with a grip so tight I expected the crystal to shatter. He kept shooting glances at his father, a silent, frantic plea for control, but the narrative was no longer his. He was a player in a drama whose script had been stolen. Eleanor, ever the strategist, tried to counter. She spoke loudly of Corinne's wonderful progress and the family's unwavering unity. Her voice was brittle, a porcelain veneer cracking under immense pressure. Her performance was for a theater that was already empty. The audience was watching a different play. Corinne sat beside me, a study in quiet fortitude. She ate little, her hands resting calmly in her lap. She knew her role was simply to exist, to be the silent, living refutation of their lies. Her presence alone, under my public protection, was an act of defiance that spoke louder than any accusation. We were a united front, an image of solidarity that systematically dismantled the family's portrait of a hysterical girl and her concerned guardians. As the main course was cleared, I leaned towards Lord Ashbourne. "Before the toasts," I said, my voice low and pleasant, "I have a small matter of family history I wish to share. It concerns the late Marchioness and a certain red leather ledger." Eleanor's fork clattered against her plate. Marcus went pale, the color draining from his face as if he'd seen a specter. His father stared at me, his mouth slightly agape, a fish gasping for air. The room fell into a sudden, profound silence. Not a polite hush, but a heavy, breathless stillness, the kind that precedes a hanging. The rope was tightening. The stage was set. There was no escape for any of us now. The irreversible momentum had been achieved. I had believed them once, not fully, not without question, but enough. Enough to hesitate. Enough to doubt her when I should have seen the truth sooner. That hesitation had nearly cost her everything. It would not cost her again. The chair scraped sharply against the floor as I rose, the sound cutting through the room like a blade drawn too quickly. Every conversation died mid-breath. Every eye turned. From within my coat, I withdrew the crimson ledger. It did not fall heavily. It did not need to. The soft thud against the white tablecloth carried further than any raised voice. It was final. I placed my hand over it, not to claim it, but to anchor the moment. "Lord Ashbourne," I said, my voice steady, measured, impossible to ignore, "you speak often of family honor." A murmur moved through the table. "Careful, Valecrest," someone said quietly. "This is not your affair." I did not look at them. I continued, my gaze sweeping across the room, lingering just long enough on those whose approval I was about to forfeit. "Let us examine it." Marcus moved first, not forward, back, just enough to reveal the truth before he could contain it. Eleanor did not move at all, but her hand, resting so carefully beside her plate, tightened until the knuckles blanched white. Across the table, a glass tipped. No one reached for it. I opened the ledger. The pages whispered as they turned, a quiet sound that seemed somehow louder than the silence that followed. "This belonged to your late Marchioness," I continued, "her accounts, her observations." I did not rush. I let them feel it. "I fear for Corinne." A ripple moved through the room. Not sound, yet, but something close to it. "Marcus's greed has grown unmanageable. Eleanor encourages it." Now the reaction came, a sharp intake of breath. Someone dropped a fork. Another chair shifted back an inch too far, wood grinding softly against marble. "They speak of my health," I read, lifting my gaze just long enough to meet Marcus's. "In whispers." He shook his head, not in denial, in panic. "They watch me. And if anything should happen," I closed the book with deliberate care, "it will not be by accident." Silence shattered, not loudly, but in fractures. Whispers, sharp and disbelieving, spread like cracks in glass. Faces turned, lines were drawn without a word spoken. No one looked at Corinne, not yet. They were still deciding what she was, victim or witness. Marcus surged to his feet, the motion too fast, too desperate. This is fabrication." His voice broke, not completely, but enough. Eleanor rose more slowly. "Your Grace," she said, each word placed with surgical precision, "you are overstepping." "Am I?" I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. "You sealed a room to bury evidence," I said calmly. "You isolated her. You controlled the narrative. A beat. And tonight, you completed your mistake. And I will not remain silent for the sake of your name or mine. That was when they looked at Corinne. All of them. At once. She had not moved. Not since the beginning. But now there was something else. For the briefest moment, so brief most would miss it, her fingers tightened against the fabric of her gown. A single breath, drawn deeper than the rest. Then it was gone. She rose. Not abruptly, not theatrically, deliberately. Her gaze moved across the room, not pleading, not triumphant, but steady, controlled. "I have nothing to add," she said quietly. And that was worse, far worse, because there was nothing left to defend. The judgment had already been made. One by one, chairs shifted back, not in panic, in rejection. Space opened around the Ashbourne family, an invisible boundary no one dared cross. Marcus did not sit. Eleanor did not speak. They simply remained, at the center of something that no longer belonged to them. And Corinne, standing beside me, was no longer part of their story. She was the end of it. The great Ashbourne residence on the square now stands as a monument to silence. Its windows are dark, its name meticulously excised from every invitation list in the city. The lingering scent of ruin is a permanent fixture in the air around it. Their fall was not a slow decline, it was a public severing, an amputation performed with the clean, cold blade of social consensus. They have been relegated to the countryside, a living death from which there is no return. Corinne now commands her mother's shipping empire. She moves through society not as a victim, but as a quiet force, her vulnerability replaced by a formidable grace. The whispers that once followed her are now ones of awe, and a healthy measure of fear. She has reclaimed her name, her fortune, and her mind. I, in turn, have paid the price for this public justice, not in whispers, but in distance. Invitations that no longer arrive. Conversations that fall silent when I enter a room. Allies who now measure their words with care, uncertain whether I remain one of them. I broke their most sacred rule, and they have not forgiven it. My peers look at me with a new, chilled respect. By shattering the aristocratic code of silence, I invited scandal to the steps of Valacrest. I broke their most sacred rule, that the sins of our own class must remain buried in velvet and stone. They ask why I would risk my own standing for her. They do not understand. My sacrifice was not for society's approval, but as penance for a silence I kept long ago, for another woman who was called unwell to hide a man's crimes. Share your thoughts on this scandal. Was the cost of truth too high? In our world, victory is not about what you gain. It is about what you are finally willing to lose.